And just so folks are aware, this workshop will be recorded and available to view afterwards. We'll be sure to send out a follow-up email with a link to that, so in case you want that for future reference. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. This is the fourth in our series of workshops the Research Communications team at University of Utah Health has been hosting. If this is your first time joining us, there are some others that we have. Sophia Friesen did a great one about honing elevator pitches. Andrea Gallegos hosted a panel talking about using social media to spotlight your research, and then Julie Kiefer talked about doing interviews with the media. Again, we've recorded these sessions, so if you would like to watch any of those and you've missed them in the past, we have those available to view on the University of Utah Health YouTube page. Today, we're going to be talking about giving a great presentation. And just as an introduction of myself, my name's Kyle Wheeler. I am the marketing manager for the University of Utah Health Research Communications team. And to give you a little background on myself, I have a bachelor's degree in speech communication. I've worked in the private sector at a number of companies working on designing slide decks for sales teams and executives, and also doing content presentations about products. And I have worked for the University of Utah in two different stints, once with the Graduate Medical Education Office for about 4 years, and then almost 6 years now working in communications for health sciences research. And I have also spent some time working as a Cambodian language interpreter, specializing in interpretation for public speakers. So on that note, I actually want to start off with just a story from my time as a Cambodian language interpreter. And one of the things that we were taught pretty early on is that when you're doing language interpretation, it's important to have a few strategies in place because of the fact that the English language, particularly the spoken language, is among the most succinct of currently used languages. And so when you're interpreting to another target language, it's important to have some strategies in place to make sure that you can keep pace with the speaker. And one of the strategies that we were taught was when you get the speaker's notes in advance of a speech, to highlight some key points or main points in the speech, so that if you do find yourself falling behind, you could articulate those main points, but then catch back up to the speaker and keep pace with them. And I had a friend that was a very, very fluent and articulate speaker, and he decided to join the team, and I was really excited to have him come on board. And so as he started to get into this, he got a lot of the typical training that most of us did for these tips and tricks for staying caught up. And so as we were approaching the first event where he would be interpreting, he was the first up in the sound booth, and we'd usually go into the sound booth in pairs. And we had another person in the booth with him. The speaker started, and he made it about a paragraph into the speech, and he just froze. And it was quickly apparent that he had kind of gone into this fight or flight or freeze mode. So the other person in the booth muted the mic, leaned over to check and see if he was okay, see if he might recover. It was quickly apparent that he might not recover to do the speech, but he was doing okay physically and mentally. And so that person took over the speech and finished it out. We did a post-mortem after the fact to kind of figure out what tips and tricks he might be able to use to be more successful in the future. And what we realized is that he had not highlighted main points in the speech that he could use to catch up if he fell behind. He kind of felt like he was pretty competent and that he could speak quickly, so he would just speak fast and keep up. And so when he fell behind, he had no strategies for keeping up, and that caused him to kind of go into this freeze mode. I want to glean from that story just a theme that we'll use today to talk about giving presentations, and that is the idea of organization. And we'll use that as kind of a uniting theme for the presentation today. And I really want to use three pillars to really distill down this idea of organizing towards giving a great presentation. The first is to organize yourself. The second is to organize the audience experience. And the third is to organize your tools. Now, when I talk about organizing, I don't want to impose on people that you've got to be some kind of type A personality to be successful in giving great presentations. So what I hope that you'll take from today is maybe just some ideas for how you can organize yourself and organize the experience and organize tools in a way that works for you. And we'll go through some different things that have been strategies for myself and strategies that I've picked up from the private sector. And hopefully you can find some ways that maybe that maps onto your experience as a researcher, as someone working in academia. Let's dive into talking about organizing yourself. The first thing that I think is important is sometimes we kind of
I think we lost him. Let's see what's going on.
sorry, folks, about that. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize for that technical challenge that I've had, it seems. Um, Anyways, as we're getting into thinking about organizing ourselves, I want us to start with just documenting our rough ideas, thoughts kind of without constraints. And to me, as we're thinking about preparing for a presentation, I really want us to start simple. Put your basic and original thoughts to paper. You can see I've got a picture on screen of how I like to start, which is I like to just get out some graph paper and put down my rough notes, and they're kind of haphazard and all over the place. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the way that you approach it, but if you can find a system that works for you, the important thing to me is that you're documenting the ideas that are important for your presentation. And here I kind of want to bring up the point that, most of the folks here on this call, you are experts in your field or you're emerging experts in your field. I would encourage you not to allow your expertise to lull you into a belief that you're ready to communicate your expertise. Um, much like that colleague of mine with the language interpretation, a very competent, fluent speaker, but since he didn't organize himself fully, he still had challenges in being able to communicate in that particular context. Once you've kind of documented your rough ideas, I think it's really important for us in advance of giving a presentation to let your thoughts breathe a little bit. With your original thoughts down and you're thinking through it, what kind of clarity emerges? I like to go for a walk, or, I live alone, and so in my apartment, you would probably find me talking to myself a lot, especially if I'm thinking about a presentation, just thinking my ideas out loud. Some of you might find yourselves a little more social, and it's easier for you to bounce ideas off of other people. Find some strategies for yourself that allows you to kind of go through those rough thoughts and refine them a little bit. The next thing that I'd like to encourage is don't build detailed slides too early. There's some creative pitfalls that I think come with getting into building out your detailed slides early on in your process of getting ready for a presentation. You may have heard the axiom that the medium is the message, and I think is kind of meant by that is that sometimes you feel a little bit constrained by the medium that you're trying to utilize. And so I like to make sure that even if you are a visual person and you like to use slides to kind of visualize where you're going, or you have some other visual strategy you like to use, don't get too married to that. Allow that to kind of help you, but allow yourself to continue to be in a creative phase. The other pitfall that I think can occur when you start building polished slides early is it can kind of become a little bit of a sunk cost. So, we can get really married to polished slides, and then we realize later maybe we want to present the information in a different way, and those polished slides are kind of begging us to keep um, using them even if they don't necessarily fit. Finally, I want us to start to organize our ideas in kind of a more distilled way as we're going through this ideation phase. And so can we find a way to play with connecting or grouping our ideas? You can see here I've put another picture from my own experience here preparing for this presentation. I like to use sticky notes, so I went to my kitchen countertop and started laying out sticky notes with some subpoints that I had that I wanted to address. And then that kind of helps you, if you can find a pattern that works for you, you might start to find some interesting takeaways that you can focus on for your presentation and find some coherent or obvious themes. Really, at this point of ideation, I really like to reach a point where there's a group of ideas that I know I can connect as I'm presenting. Let's talk about organizing the audience experience. And we'll spend the bulk of the presentation today kind of talking about this area of organization. Oftentimes, working in academia, you're probably finding that you have a variety of different audiences that you're speaking to. And so I think it's really important for us to ask a few questions about the audience before we get too far into fully fleshing out our presentation. Um, and so a few questions that you might ask yourself is, who is the audience? And then a couple other questions, what do they want to get out of the presentation? And I think the other side of the coin with this could be, what do I want them to get out of the presentation? And then, for you all, many of you on the call being researchers and experts, you possess some expertise that is probably interesting to your audience or of interest to your audience. So posing the question, what do I know that they would want to know? Next, I want to talk a little bit about fallacies to keep in mind as you're thinking about your audience. So avoiding some assumptions about the audience as you're preparing your presentation. The first is that people synthesize information. And I think this can be critical working in academia. We often think that we present information if we present information in a digestible way, the audiences are capable of making their own inferences out of the data we share. Most won't, or they will make different conclusions than you intended. So if there are inferences that you want people to take away from your presentation, make sure that you're being clear about that. And if there's information you've gleaned from the data that you're presenting, make sure that that's clear. Another fallacy is that people act on information. There's a reason that marketers are deliberate about calls to action. If if there is something that you want an audience to do or take away from your presentation, make that clear. So for example, if you're presenting to a group of colleagues and you're at a point in your research that you're looking for some collaborators for the next phase, make sure you state that. Make sure that you're giving them that very specific call to action of, hey, I'm looking for someone to work with on some new research. If you're speaking to donors, talk to your advancement partner to see if they're going to issue some kind of call to action or if you need to kind of elicit that in your presentation. Another fallacy is that your ideas are memorable. The reality is that most of what we present is not going to be remembered. And so posing the question to ourselves, are we designing our presentation so a few key takeaways are obvious, repeated, and resonant in their delivery? In this particular presentation, I know most of you are going to walk away and not remember most of what I've said today. But hopefully, because I've distilled out these three main points of organize yourself, organize the audience experience, and organize your tools, hopefully at least that is remembered by a group of you. And there's still going to be others of you that the only thing you remember is, I think he talked about organization for presentations. And so, if we can be thinking about what are the key takeaways we want to have people take away from our presentations, we can fight against this idea that our ideas are memorable. The last fallacy I want to address is just that facts are persuasive. We often believe that if people can just see the reality of the data, that they will be convinced. And as social and emotional creatures, data usually needs to be socialized and paired with impactful stories to have a persuasive effect. And I think this is particularly key working in academia. You're trained to be persuaded by facts, but most people aren't. And so being aware of that in the audiences that you're speaking to can allow you to that space to utilize other tools if you need to be persuasive. I want to talk a little bit about structuring our presentations. And what I mean when I'm talking about structuring is more about structuring the content rather than visual structure. We'll touch a little bit on some visual structures that you could use. That could be a whole series unto itself, building out slides and the visual structure that we're using. But I really want to focus on um, building some structure around the information that we're sharing. And I think this can be a key for setting the pace of our presentations and also for creating impact with our audiences. So I like to think of structure as your guide to organizing ideas. Organizing your information around a structure allows you as a presenter to see where your presentation is lacking or too bulky as you build it, and it gives you an invaluable guide to pace yourself as you present. And from the audience's perspective, structure helps your audience follow you. A familiar structure of ideas paired with some visual clues gives your audience mental signposts that connects them to your content. It's mentally easing because they can intuit where you're taking them. And I might add here that we exist in an attention economy. So anything that we can do that helps our audience keep their attention on the presentation. I'm guessing at this point in the presentation, some of you have gone and checked emails or looked at your chat or pulled out your phone, and that's okay. But hopefully what I've done with my presentation is I've given you a few signposts so that when you do bring your attention back here, you know where we are. You may notice that at the top right of the presentation, I've kind of put these little signals of which portion of the presentation we're in. Like right now, we're talking through audience experience. So if you can use some things both in terms of familiar structure of information and maybe a few little visual tricks like that, it helps your audience intuit where they're going. So with that, I want to talk about a few specific. Oh, well, let me actually share an anecdote before we do that to kind of illustrate the value. Several years ago, I went on a road trip around the country, and I kind of wanted to spend some time doing a project that would help me advance my multimedia content creation skills. And so I went out with the idea of I'm just going to talk to strangers and ask them about their life stories. And I found that they really struggled when I just gave them that open-ended, hey, tell me about your life. They struggled to give me any kind of story. But I kind of landed in this space of asking people, hey, when you were a kid, you probably had a career in mind that you dreamed about doing, and maybe you had in mind a way that you thought your personal life would go. Uh, what was that, and how has your life panned out differently compared to what you envisioned as a kid? And giving just that little bit of structure just opened people up. It allowed them this space that they could attach their ideas and experience to. And so I think that is illustrative of the importance of structure for ideas. It helps us be a storyteller, be a person presenting information, but it brings people in as well. Like I said, I'd like to talk about a few different types of structure that we can use for structuring our information and our presentations. The first is using stories. And so an overarching themes that unite ideas in impactful ways are things that we can glean from stories, right? So some topics can kind of have a uniting story or analogy that's useful for presenting our information. If you haven't had a chance in the past to attend or watch any of the VTI videos here at University of Utah Health, I would encourage you to check some of those out. I think we'll have a link to that playlist dropped into the chat. The first couple of videos in that playlist are VTI vignettes, which are a little bit more documentary style, highlighting some late career researchers. But the presentations are kind of the other ones are these kind of TED style presentations where they use story about themselves to kind of give you the story of their career in research and how they've landed where they are. This can be a really useful tool for structuring your information. Stories can also be used as a small vignette. You'll notice that I've used a couple vignettes today. I'm not going to use stories to unite the entire theme of today's session, but they can also be useful in illustrating a point if that your audience might benefit from that. Talking about stories, if you aren't comfortable with utilizing stories, I'd like to give just a loose structure using the hero's journey that you might explore that can help you utilize stories. So the hero's journey, it can be a template for structuring things. And in a distilled way, we would start with being in the comfort zone. So this is where problems are abstract. We're comfortable where we are. Um, and then we have the departure. A problem manifests. Someone needs to take it on. Who will answer the call? Talking about that story that I opened up with, that colleague of mine, they kind of had a comfort zone with their experience with the language, and then becoming an interpreter, they're starting to see the problem, but it's still not entirely clear what exactly it's like to be a language interpreter. And then we confront the problem. Things get real, weaknesses are exposed, deeper questions are asked of the hero, and community is revealed. So in that particular experience, we were able to rally around that person and give them some instruction to help them succeed in the future. And then we move towards solving the problem. So the hero's abilities, their new insights, their skills get tested and proven, and the moment to prove old weaknesses as newly practiced strengths arrive. So later, that colleague of mine was able to be really successful with those added skills. And then we can talk about returning with the boon. So the community benefits from the problem being solved. The hero can now share wisdom and teach skills to others. So with that colleague, they're able to teach others now how to be successful as a language interpreter. The hero's journey can be a way to tell your story, but can also be a way to position the audience as a hero. And this might be a little bit more abstract, but I think a key to doing this is to position a problem that's relevant to your audience and showing them how information that you're sharing can help them in their journey of solving that problem. And so then we can become this guide in helping people climb the steps of their journey, of their own hero's journey. Closely related to the structure of using stories is timelines. And so what you'll notice if you watch some of those Vitae speakers, some of them just kind of tell their own story as a timeline. And this can be a really useful structure for telling the story, but it can also, I think, be really useful if you're talking about research. It can be a nice way to talk about the journey of discovery in your research as you're talking about it. And so you can move through events that have happened in your research. And it's also a very sensible way for audiences to see where you're going. They get a sense of pace in your presentation. One of my favorite forms of structure to utilize is that of juxtaposition. And I think this can be really highly valuable to you as an academic. The idea here is that you're positioning some contrast for your audience to understand the context of information you're presenting. So it might be that you're presenting an unknown or something that was previously unknown, and that you then talk about new knowledge that emerges, the new knowns as a result of your research. Another thing that you might do is say, for example, you're a clinician and there's a clinical problem that you've confronted. You can use that problem and then juxtapose that with the solution that you and colleagues have been working on to address that clinical problem. A great example of this, and I'll have someone drop into the chat a link to Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. I would encourage you to go and watch that speech, but he uses expertly this idea of juxtaposition. You'll notice on a macro level, if you watch that speech, that he illustrates the plight of the person of color in America, particularly since the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, and then juxtaposes that with his hopes and dreams for what their experience could be in America. But he also does it on a micro level. So for example, in one of the famous lines that he says, "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And so he uses that in this micro level as well, where there's the juxtaposition just in a single sentence of the experience that his children are currently having versus what he hopes they could have in the future. Another example that you might check out sometime as well, it's a very different tone, but Steve Jobs, when he originally presented the iPhone, was another one where he uses juxtaposition, contrasting all of the different devices that you're having to use with the hopeful future that is now of having a device that contains all of those things in one. Another structure, and you'll notice that this is the one that I'm using today, is that of categories of information. Sometimes stories might feel a bit excessive, like if you're presenting to peers and other academic audience, stories might not be the way that they're going to necessarily connect with your information. And so just moving through some sensible categories of data can be a way to present to them. Again, you'll notice that I've got three simple categories of organize yourself, organize the audience experience, and organize your tools. This allows for a logical progression through information and space for you to describe and flesh out those categories. And it can be a little more memorable for your audience while still allowing you to tell little vignette stories to support some of your facts. And this one might be a little more challenging to use, but I just wanted to share this idea of using a visual tour as a way of structuring your information. So if you have a lot of available and quality visual aids, you can allow those to be central to your presentation. And you might look for a uniting visual aid to connect supporting imagery. So I've kind of fabricated a faux example here. So let's say that I'm a geologist that's gone out into the field and taken some soil samples. And if there's any geologists on the call, they're probably going to be, palm to forehead with me describing their work because I'm probably totally off. But let's say that you've got an aerial shot of an area that you've gone out and taken samples from different sites. And so you can share that aerial photo as a uniting feature in your presentation. And then you might zoom into these different sites through your presentation to talk about the findings you had from these different sites where you took samples. I'll have someone drop into the chat. There's a platform called Prezi that's really geared towards building a visual presentation. The link there is to their 2017 Prezi Awards, so people who did kind of an exceptional job. I think that year they had some really quality examples. There's one example in particular from UMass Amherst where they're uniting visual tour piece is an aerial illustration of their campus map. And you can zoom around on the map to different parts of campus, and there's data associated with that. And so this could be an interesting way, although it is complex. And so I would recommend that you have someone who's maybe visually inclined or has some design experience if you're planning to use some kind of visual tour. But also this is something that may be natural as well. Anybody that remembers their junior high or high school biology class and their teacher talking about the structure of a cell, that's really presenting with the visual tour almost always when people are doing that, where they're showing some illustration of the cell and zooming in on different parts of the cell to talk about it. So as I close out talking about the audience experience and talking about structure, I do again want to acknowledge that most of you being people who work in academia, I know that there's a prescribed way for you to present information the majority of the time. But I hope that you can take from some of these ideas of how to structure your information something that's maybe novel that you feel comfortable with playing around with in a future presentation, particularly as you're thinking about other audiences. That prescription of how to present your information may work really well for speaking to academic audiences, but do you have other audiences where maybe you're going out and speaking to the community or other instances where trying one of these novel approaches might be helpful? Lastly, I'd like to just move into talking about organizing your tools. As I mentioned earlier, I don't like for us to flesh out all of our slides early on. Obviously, if you're a visual thinker, you're going to have some slides in place already as you're moving along. But hopefully at this phase, as you've kind of settled on a structure, you've fleshed out the ideas that you want to talk about, we can really genuinely move into fleshing out your slides and completing the presentation and the things that you're going to use. So first, let's collect our visual aids. What's going to help your audience hear your message? One of the first things that I'd like for you to do is make sure that you simplify charts and graphs that you're using that represent data. It's really easy as someone working in academia because where you already have charts and graphs available to just drop those into a PowerPoint slide and stand up and talk about it. If your charts are busy, which may be helpful in the context of a paper because it allows people to kind of reference them, that could be really distracting for your audience in a presentation. And so I would hope that as you're talking through or as you're putting in charts and data, that you'll simplify those so that you can keep people centered on what you want to talk about. Gather high resolution versions of your own images. So if you have your own imagery, like say that you've got some microscopy, make sure that you're using high resolution versions of those. And then look for complementary photos. If you're working at a university, ask your local communications professional if they have photos that might help. We usually have a pretty large library of photos that the public affairs team might have access to. And also we'll have some stock imagery available as well that might be helpful. So if you think that there might be some images that are relevant to your topic, reach out to your local communications professional. Then let's think about incorporating engagement. You've got content. How else can you connect it to people? So yesterday, my supervisor, Julie Kiefer, and we went through my slides for today, and she brought up a couple points where some examples might be useful to talk through and illustrate those points a little bit further. Think about analogies for complex ideas that you have. Are there some complex ideas that you've had experience using an analogy successfully, or that you've heard others successfully use? Would participation be useful? Especially when we're doing these kind of digital meetings, like on Zoom, live polls can be useful, Q&A, breakout groups, etc. And then also thinking about, would it be useful for you to have a co-presenter? Is there somebody who has some subject matter expertise that you could loop in to help out? Then finally, let's finish building our slides. Here, I'd like for us to use the structure that you've built your information around to flesh out your slides and organize the topics and the order of your slides. I'd also like to invite everybody to minimize the volume of text. Usually a first draft of your slides are going to have probably a lot of text in them. I don't want you to go down to where you're uncomfortable, but can you pare down the amount of text that's appearing on the screen to where it helps you as a visual aid, as a presenter, but it's not distracting to the point that your audience just spends time reading the screen instead of listening to you. Add your collected images, maximize visual breaks and white space. You'll notice through my presentation, there's been a couple moments where I've just had a single photo on screen, allowing for there to be just a little bit of a visual break where some people don't have their eyes darting around trying to read and gather things, and they can just focus on what you're saying as a presenter. And then use brand tools. Your organization or university likely has templates. If you work at University of Utah Health, there is a very robust PowerPoint template available on Pulse. I think there should be a link in the chat for that. This presentation has been built on that template. And so I really recommend doing this because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And the other thing is that you have your subject matter expertise, and that may not always translate to having the greatest taste or sense of color. So let the people who have designed templates for us using the brand do that work for you. And the last thing that I'd like to talk about here is just to be cautious with AI, especially AI imagery. I was in a seminar recently with the American Marketing Association where they were talking about AI. And one of the things that was brought up is that in Europe, there's several countries that are developing laws on who owns the output of AIs. And some of those countries have decided that the person prompting the AI owns those outputs. We do not have such law here in the US. And so I would encourage you to be careful. If you're presenting to smaller groups and they're just colleagues, that might be a little more safe to do that in that environment. But if you're presenting to larger, more public audiences, there may be some caution warranted for using AI there. So I just want to close things out and just kind of do a quick recap. My hope for you all today is that you'll pick out some strategies that we've talked about over the course of this presentation to try in preparation for and in the delivery of your next presentation. Again, kind of those three main points of organize yourself. I hope that even as an expert, you'll take the time to collect your raw ideas and move them towards ideas organized for your specific presentation. Oftentimes we have presentations we've given to other groups, and we're just going to kind of recycle that. But, even if that's the case, can you be thoughtful about organizing it for that specific group? And then as we're organizing for that audience experience, use structure to organize ideas in an accessible way for your audience. Again, there is a prescribed way usually for academics to present information, but are there some tips or structures that we've talked about today that you might try out or at least try a portion of? And then lastly, organizing your tools. Give yourself time to collect visual aids and mold your content around your plan. I think to me, that's one of the biggest things about giving a great presentation is giving yourself time to make sure that you can implement some of these tips and tricks. With that, I'll close the presentation out, and then the research communications team was planning to just open up some open up some question and answer time. And so that would include Julie Kiefer, Sophia Friesen, and Andrea Gallegos. And so if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. And I apologize for my camera. It was working and then it's not. So you may have to just enjoy the faces of the other folks on the team.
We have a question from Katie. Any tips or tricks for presenting to people who may have low vision or hearing difficulties?
That is a really, really great question. Sophia or Julie, do either of you have any thoughts about that?
I think that's a really thoughtful question, and I haven't thought about it that much. But I think even just posing that question and being aware that, there are diverse audiences and we never know all of those needs, can help people to keep that in mind. I think one thing that jumps to mind is I actually have a son who's red-green colorblind. And so when I see slides where people, I mean, I've seen slides where people have green background and red on top, that drives me crazy. So, just being aware of, some of those limitations that people have and accommodating for that, I think can go a long way. Um, I think another thing that jumps to mind is, if you're presenting data, for example, um, if you can actually describe what's on there, in addition to saying what it means, even if it's just a brief description, as you can see, there's this, data point way up here, compared to this one way down there. This means blah, blah, blah. I think that can help anybody, to be honest, but also people who with low vision problems, to really understand what you're showing them and what they're trying to say, what you're trying to say.
I'll just add that having the right kind of technological support can really help make your presentations more accessible. For red-green colorblindness specifically, there are a number of downloadable tools that you can use to put your presentations, essentially check whether they're red-green colorblind friendly by removing one of those color channels and seeing if everything is still clear. For hearing difficulties, if you can get auto captioning set up, that can be good. And if you're presenting in a large venue in person, sometimes rooms have audio support for folks who have hearing aids. So inquiring about that ahead of time and seeing if you can get that set up is, I think, good. But yeah, that's a really good question and something that I would like to do better at as well.
Yeah, and I think, like, for example, with this one, this session was recorded, and I think we will have a transcript of it is available as well. So making sure that those are just provided so that people that maybe were in attendance, I don't think we necessarily, that might have been the case. Well, that's not something I had checked on, is to make sure that captioning was available during today, but at least, making sure that there's an opportunity to use a transcript as well.
Okay, I'll go ahead and read the next question. Any tips or tricks for presenting a lightning talk where you only are given 5 minutes to present your research?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. I think the most important thing for any talk that is sort of emphasized in a lightning talk is to figure out like what's the one thing that you really want people to come away with, because you're not going to have time in 5 minutes to really get into the data. Like as Kyle mentioned, like people don't remember a lot of things. Um, so figuring out what's your one sentence takeaway and building out from there is, I think, the thing that I would focus on most for that one.
Yeah, I would add, especially for short presentations like that, visuals are really important. Like make them simple. People can only absorb so much information, especially in a short amount of time. So, make sure your visual tracks with, there's a visual to go with this main takeaway that Sophia talked about. And, have it be eye-catching and just very simple. Not a complicated graph with, 100 data points, but, something with like 3 data points or something like that. Um, so yeah, simple, short messaging is the best.
I'm also a believer, I'll just add that, presentations can be a multimedia experience, and obviously they are. I mean, you're using some visual aids and you're speaking, but I think it's also possible that if you have some time, if you've got one pagers that you've used to talk about your research, have those ready to give to people after you've done something, a quick thing like a lightning talk, so that people have something additional that they can take away.
Okay. How to minimize text volume for case presentations that include roles, narratives. How do I make sure my audience follow me without the whole narrative displayed?
So I will say, I think you really need to figure out what works for you. I've had a experience of building slides for other people, and sometimes I've forced them into having such a minimal amount of text that they're lost when they're presenting the slide. And so I think you really, to me, the biggest thing is practice. If you practice your presentation, you don't have to rely on text so much on the screen. And that can be really the biggest thing. And you can kind of figure out the amount of text that you're comfortable with. The other thing is if you're comfortable clicking a relatively large amount, animating your text so that you're just moving through it point by point and people aren't in a position they're reading ahead.
Yeah, I think what I would add is, I think some people think that you have to have all your information on your slides, but you don't. I mean, there's a reason you're giving a presentation and not giving somebody a book, right? So if you're presenting, they should be listening to you and not, they actually shouldn't be spending a lot of time focusing on the slides. They should be focusing on you. And so really the slides are just a tool to emphasize, key points of what you're trying to say. And so if you're giving a case presentation, a lot of that is going to be verbal, I think. But maybe you're just showing a few pictures, or, emphasizing a few key words or key points from what you're talking about, on the slide. And that's really what those slides are for.
Okay, last question. Did you use PowerPoint for your slides today, Kyle?
I did use PowerPoint. It is, as I mentioned, it is based off of that template that University of Utah Health's marketing team has posted on Pulse. So there's 3 different versions if you want to access Pulse. And I know a lot of the research community here at the U does not use Pulse, but you just need your UID and you can use your single sign-on to get in there. One of those versions is very robust. It's probably like 50 different slides that you can use. And it gives you some also, the other thing that's great about it is it embeds the brand colors. So if you're building new charts in there, it will use the brand colors.
So I think we skipped a question from Jessica Swanson. What's your opinion starting with all the information you're going to discuss displayed on a slide versus bringing text visuals on via animation as you're making points? I don't know if somebody else wants to take that first.
I would definitely go with bringing things in one by one, if you have a lot of information. And also to echo what's been said previously, you don't need to have all the information that you discuss on the slide, especially not in text format. So yeah, I generally err on the side of have less on the slide, and if that means bringing things up one at a time, that can work really well.
Yeah, I'll say, I think Kyle modeled it really well. I mean, there were some slides that had a number of bullet points, but when he did that, the bullet points were really short, like it was just a phrase for each one. So, it's all together wasn't that much copy on the slide. But then, in that one example where you had the fallacies and that those were a little bit more wordy, then he brought those in one by one. So I think, yeah, you just don't want to overwhelm your audience with too much information at the same time. And so, kind of being more judicious about when you can be more judicious about when you bring things in one by one versus having everything at once.
And I would just emphasize, like practice that, but do what's comfortable for you. You don't have to reach an endpoint where you're talking without any visual aid for yourself, but practice will help with that.
I just want to ask if you have any tips or tricks to engage the audience or pull them back in. And I know you discussed some of these in your presentation, but Julie, Sophia?
Um, I try to have, if I'm sort of switching tack or like moving to another section, another um, box of information, I try and make that really obvious both visually and in the way I'm speaking. So I'll often put a slide in that's the background is a different color. It has almost no text on it, something to indicate, hey, we're doing something different now. And if you've been tuned out, you can tune back in now and not, and it'll be okay. You can get this chapter even if you maybe haven't been tuned in previously.
Yeah, I'll add, this doesn't work for every type of presentation, but I think engaging the audience is a really great way to keep them engaged. So I guess that's a little repetitive, but so Kyle has mixed in this panel discussion, with his presentation. So that's, something a little bit different. It's going to get your attention in a different way. But you can incorporate that into your presentation too. Maybe posing questions to your audience, partway through your presentation, kind of make sure that they're paying attention. It kind of can help you reiterate main points. And it also just sort of mixes things up a little bit so that they're, maybe it wakes them up a little bit. Another good way of engaging the audience is story, like Kyle talked about. It just kind of breaks up that pattern a little bit of like, I'm presenting, I'm presenting, I'm presenting, and like, oh, now here's something a little bit different. It's a little bit personal, engaging in a different way. It just sort of, I think breaks what can be kind of a lulling, can become, kind of a lulling monotony. I mean, yeah, could be that. Doesn't have to be into something a little bit different that, kind of catches your audience's attention and changes things up for a minute to keep it engaging.
I really like this suggestion that Diana Lim dropped into the chat to take pauses and give the audience space or time to think about what you said, and specifically using black slides or blank screens to do that. If you've ever watched any TED Talks, there's oftentimes huge stretches of those talks where there isn't anything on screen. And I think that that can be a really good way to settle down where the audience focus can go and bring it back to you. It's a little bit more challenging, I think, in a digital like Zoom environment, but that can still be a really good strategy.
Okay, we have another question. Is there anything we can do in our presentations to combat nervousness?
I think like practice is the main thing. Like you don't want to practice so much that you become a robot when you're giving your presentation, but you do want to practice enough that you can anticipate, you can remember, what's coming next in your presentation. And so you feel comfortable, kind of moving through that process. I think also like, with Kyle's story, practice also helps you, if something unexpected does happen, a technical glitch or, whatever, it can help you to get back on track because even if you have to adjust on the fly, you remember what those main points are, what the main, structure of your talk is, so that you can kind of jump back in, where needed.
Just gonna co-sign that and um, add on that I often practice the first couple of intro slides of a talk more than anything else. And I find that that helps me at least because I have that first bit just down cold and it lets you kind of get into a groove. And after that, you're talking, you're already in it. It's easier just to go with the flow. Ooh, everyone's dropping a lot of color accessibility tools in the chat. I love this.
I think even just, simple things that, you probably hear, but, maybe 5-10 minutes before your talk, just take time for yourself. And, whatever that is, just go offline for a minute, take a couple deep breaths. You see athletes, put on their headphones and listen to their favorite songs before they go out in competition, whatever it is to like just kind of reset for a minute before you jump in. I think that can go a long way. And I'll add one more thing. Also kind of taking from an athlete's cue, I think just visualizing ahead of time, like how you think it's going to go. Like often that really kind of sets the tone and helps you, kind of prepare internally. And it's something that really helps me too.
Kyle, did you have anything to add? I feel like your organization is a very helpful way to go into a presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I am a little more of a type A personality, and so organizing, as you can see throughout the presentation that was given today, I think is really key for me. If I know what I'm talking about, I think that really helps settle my nerves down. But I think just another thing to add is if you can have a dry run with anybody else. I mean, like just walking through my slides yesterday with Julie really helped me have some added confidence. Like I've presented a lot. I feel pretty good about my skills, but I still get nervous. And so being able to just share them with somebody else, not even necessarily giving the full spiel, but just sharing the ideas and sharing the general themes with somebody else really helped settle me down.
That brings me to an earlier question when someone asked if we had any opportunities at the U of U to review slides or practice presentations.
Like a structured way to do that? Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's you gathering your friends or your family, or your pets, or your mirror, standing in front of your mirror. I think those are kind of the tried and true ways. My cats aren't very interested in what I have to say, so they're maybe not the best audience.
Okay, and one last question about just being collaborative and what kind of meeting tools where a whiteboard might be useful and polling and things of that sort would be helpful. And do those help?
I would
Or do you
say,
use the, sorry.
um, like be mindful of the audience that you have. Like today, I think we had enough people that, if I had integrated some polling, we had a large enough group that might have been helpful to ask, some questions of getting some context of what people might want to know as you're presenting. So if you've built a presentation that's maybe a little more adaptive, polling might help you understand what you want to use. I don't have suggestions for tools with that, but if you are doing smaller presentation or groups for your presentations, I think whiteboarding can be a really helpful involvement or engagement thing. But I would be careful if you have a very large group doing that.
Yeah, if anyone here has recommendations like you did for the color accessibility, if you have recommendations for polling tools or other things, please drop them in the chat. I've definitely seen polling used well and then not used well. Like, so there can often be kind of a technical glitch that happens. Sometimes you have to use a QR code, and people have varying success with that. So I would say just if you use some of those more technical tools, I think they can be really useful, but then be sure to practice with them to make sure they work well. Slido, yeah, I've seen that used a lot.
Well, we've reached about the end of the hour. I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us today. As mentioned, we will send out a follow-up email with a link to a video of this, and we'll also send out a follow-up survey. If you have any thoughts on what you liked about this experience or what we could do better, please watch out for that link.
Thanks, everyone.